Your Majesty, Your Royal Highness, Excellencies, Water Prize Laureates, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you all, and thank you for joining us here at Stockholm Waterfront, and for those of you following this transmission online as well. Karin Gardes, Acting Executive Director of the Stockholm International Water Institute. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Now, to get this thing started, what is the role of the Stockholm Water Prize?
Well, thank you, Pekka, and good morning to all of you, Your Royal Highness. Stockholm Water Prize is the world's most prestigious water award. And I'm, of course, incredibly proud of the influence it has had ever since it was first established in 1991. Just as the theme of this year's World Water Week, the Stockholm Water Prize acknowledges excellence and innovation in its broadest sense. Over the years, the prize has been presented both to top scientists, but also to trailblazing practitioners. And both of these are actually essential for good and improved water governance and water management. Decisions that govern water must be based on the best available science and practical experience. And good ideas and practices must be shared. And the Stockholm Water Prize is therefore not only about recognizing astonishing people and achievements, but just as important is how the prize helps make this science and these solutions more well-known and more available, and ultimately more frequently used. So we need this bridge between science, policy, and practice. And I think that's the real spirit behind the Stockholm Water Prize.
Being available, being of use, that is exactly the theme for this morning's Meet the Laureate, because we're going to talk about how it affects our everyday lives, you know, people in general, all over the world. But this year's laureate, let's give him a big hand, Professor Andrea Rinaldo. What would you like to say about the importance of his work, his research?
Well, this year's laureate, Professor Andrea Rinaldo, is really a role model to us all. Not only has his groundbreaking research shaped several academic fields, but he has at the same time always paid particular attention and interest in how these insights can be applied in real life. And Dr. Rinaldo has helped even someone like me to understand the complex interactions between the hydrologic cycle, ecological processes, and landscape evolution.
And it is complex.
It is complex.
Extremely complex.
That's why I say
nervous.
Maybe even I have understood a tiny little bit and portion of it.
You and me both.
A little bit. But really, thanks to Professor Rinaldo's research on river networks, we have a better understanding of how to tackle the spread of solutes, invasive species, and disease. Hydrology is often associated with fluid mechanics, hydraulic engineering, but Professor Rinaldo took an alternative approach and developed new models to describe how water shapes the Earth's surface and ecosystems. And the importance of this cannot be overstated. To address water pollution or water contamination, it's of course essential to understand how solutes and pathogens move through the landscape. To protect biodiversity, it's crucial to combat invasive species. And that requires knowledge on how they travel and how they settle. And to combat waterborne disease, decision makers need to understand how pathogens survive and spread in water environments, and how human mobility affects the demography of disease in space and time. And that is As far as I understand.
I'll share one interesting fact with you that I've already learned from the professor, is that all over the world, if you just remove the names from the map, all rivers look the same, because they behave the same. I picked up something.
Well done.
They behave the same, because that's what nature does.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you, Karin.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm just trying to impress you, to begin with.
You're impressing me very much.
I forgot to introduce myself. Sorry, yes.
Wonderful job.
I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Pekka Heino, and I have the honor of speaking with this year's laureate, Professor Andrea Rinaldo. We also have with us Diane Deras from the Stockholm Water Prize Nominating Committee. Welcome. I will get back to you, Diane, but I would like to start with Andrea. You describe yourself as, quote unquote, a waterman. What does that entail?
Well, probably it has to do with my origins, of course. No one evolutionary path cannot be free of constraints of where you started out. I was born and raised in Venice, Your Majesty and Your Royal Highness. And that makes a permanent imprinting in one's life, because there you have a feeling that the symbiosis of how the context in which you live and the preoccupations for the future, in fact, and that in such a fragile environment are necessarily so. So perhaps you have the highest level of perception on what could be the dangers, in fact, of the changes that's rapidly changing beneath us. So probably that's the origin.
We will get back to Venice a little later on. You're a professor of hydrology and water resources at the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne in Switzerland, and also at the University of Padua in Italy. So you travel quite a lot. Explain to me, this is a bit, but very important part of your life. Car 1, seat 878.
Yes, I've been commuting a lot. I'm a trained man, and for 17 years, dubbing a colleague in Padua, the 17 most productive years of my life. I've been commuting from Padua and Lausanne. And we are two different worlds. But I'm very much attached to the University of Padua, my alma mater, which followed me around all the steps of my career. And I'm very grateful to the opportunities that the Swiss educational system put available to me. So car 1, seat 75, I keep booking the same train throughout, and I assume that the seat took the shape of my back.
Yes, but it's comforting, isn't it, to know exactly where. It's your home away from home, home between homes, yes, or something like that.
And trains are offices nowadays.
Yeah,
I wrote books on that train, actually. Yes. I can concentrate.
Yes, it's lovely traveling by train. You have also described yourself as first and foremost, an engineer. You're very practical. And that brings us back to what we were talking about with Karin here, that the things that you study, how do we apply that to our everyday lives?
Well, I pretend that this is an aim I always had, but if I may, my father was a real engineer, and I come from a family of water engineers, and he never took seriously my job. So he was asking, what are you doing, actually, Dad? And he loved me dearly, actually. I did love him, too. And he would ask me, what are you doing? I know that I'm writing a book. I said, how about working?
oh.
That's literally what happened. He never pretended that ours is a job, and probably is right.
Yeah.
We should be paying, actually, as professors to do what we do.
Yeah. I'm going to get back to your dad later this evening at the banquet. You have been warned.
He's probably looking at that.
Diane, civil engineer, also full professor of hydrology, and first and foremost in this context, a member of the Stockholm Water Prize Nominating Committee. And this is important because you can already nominate for next year, for 2024, and anyone can nominate, so keep that in mind. Now, when it was time to discuss Professor Rinaldo, you were the proponent, and there was also an opponent. And I have read in the committee's protocol that it was hard to find negative opinions about Andrea Rinaldo.
Ask my wife.
Okay, we haven't planned on bringing her on stage, but maybe we should. Now, and also from the written assessment concerning you, Andrea, quote unquote. His research can explain what can be seen in the day-to-day life, which is very important to raise awareness of decision makers and the general public. Now, we cannot, of course, talk about the other nominees. That would be no, because
it's a bit confidential.
Yes.
So normally all our discussion are confidential. So I will try to avoid to give information which I should not give. What is true is that the criteria for election are clear. In fact, it has to be someone on policy or practice or research. And we have really those criteria, and the committees try to look at the criteria and evaluate. There are, of course, very good candidates, so it's difficult. So when you have proponent and opponent, I want to be more precise. It's a good practice. And I didn't choose to be proponent or not. I was asked if I agreed to do that, so I did my job. Because it's a good way to, in between the committee, for the last selected 10, or to have that kind of vision. See, what is in favor and what is maybe different. So it's a process, in fact. And there is no, it's just a good way to look for each candidate, what are the criteria to really push, and what maybe are the weakness or if weakness there are. So each candidate had a proponent and opponent, and it was not my decision. It was I was asked to do it. I did it. But of course, I was as many others of the committee. We enjoy, and I don't think I have to explain a lot why we choose you, because Karin has already explained very well. And so I think it's clear that the criteria are scientific sometimes, or in case it's policy, it's different. And we were really interested in several things, the scientific, but as you said, it is important also for the committee and the nomination committee to see that it is applied. Because you could have very sophisticated research, and then some other people do apply. You did that. You tried to have application and concrete application, and also the diffusion. How you try to diffuse and give it to the others, that is very important. So the criteria are quite clear, and it's, of course, leaping to go further, to increase knowledge, but also to be sure that that knowledge will be applied and will be used by others. Those criteria are very important. That, as you say, there is a new call, and I think it would be very interesting that lots of people come, because I think it's part of the interest, and look at who were the Stockholm Water Prize to see where they are around, and I think it's really interesting, and I hope next year we will have again lots of good candidates.
Yeah. But do say something more about the application, because that's what we're trying to talk about here. That how does it apply to?
Well, there is a call which people have, and of course you have to be nominated by people who have to explain the application of his research.
The application of Andrea's work.
Well, the application is very interesting because, as it was said, hydrology now can predict or modelize species in the water or sediment or things like that. So the first application were on porous media to understand where sediment go, and it's very complex. But now there is also about species, and on biodiversity is very important to understand because it's complex. They don't follow the water always. Sometimes they can be in a part and then go slowly, and whatever, the water has different way to go from one point to another. It's not a tube, it's sophisticated. And also water disease. So one of the applications you work on was cholera. And as I always said, probably you can't avoid epidemic, but you can give the solution, or you can show how to react and how to adapt. And that is, of course, very interesting because people in the day-to-day life need to know what to do and how they can do. And it can open a bit the mind of people who have to apply strategy.
Yeah. As we've said several times, these are very complex matters, but I think the most important thing is that to try and understand what is about to happen and the different scenarios where we are headed. And then when you know that, you can work out some sort of solution, like with the, I mean, river networks and waterborne diseases, are those the most important things, would you say, in your research?
I would say yes. But thank you first of all so much, Diane, of course. But one important thing, my fascination with river networks starts with the work of a French engineer and mathematician, Benoit Mandelbrot, who actually taught us that mountains are no cones, clouds are not spheres, nor coastline has simple broken lines, nor does lightning traveling straight lines. We look at different eyes after 3,000 years to the geometry of nature. And there's something which, coupled to other issues, shows what you remarked so appropriately before. If you take out the scale bar from a map of a river, you don't know whether the Amazon or a creek behind Stockholm, because nature makes those shapes alike, statistically indistinguishable at all scales. And that is, it's important, it happens in the universe. It's a particular type of, the assistance that it could do thousands of different things, and we do always the same, regardless of the millions of possible outcomes that you have. There's something very important, even philosophically, behind it. But that kind of robustness transfers to what happens on those networks. So something which was completely out of reach, predicting, for instance, what biodiversity seen in the river network does, became feasible, became robust. So we can put a price tag on the ecosystem services, which is something in which in the past hampered our capabilities to be able to to have a proper evaluation of the wealth of nations, as Landers put it. Because indicators, wealth indicators, like gross domestic products, give an idea of a wealth. But unless you put together the natural capital into it, and I'm sure that resonates with a lifelong commitment of a royal family on those issues, means that the natural capital has to be part of the equation. And if we can provide compelling, in fact, evaluations, quantitative evaluations, that's what it happened. And as per the disease, much of science proceeds by serendipity. But we were doing something completely different, and Marino Gatto, Ignacio Rodriguez Iturbe, and myself, on a walk, getting back to a meeting of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences in Rome many years ago, we realized, serendipity exactly, that the same type of mathematical tool that were used to be and known and applied to biodiversity could apply to disease. So first, we called spatially explicit models of cholera were born that night. And
you mentioned an earlier Water Prize Laureate from 2002, Ignacio Rodriguez Iturbe. You two have worked together.
40 years.
Yes.
I'm missing him so much.
Oh.
And I'm glad in front of Your Majesty and Your Royal Highness to mention the 2002 Stockholm Water Prize winner, Ignacio Rodriguez Iturbe, who passed away last October. Was very dear to me. Easily the best hydrologist ever, in my view. Thank you for asking.
Yes, and you mentioned that you have to put a price tag on things. It's so easy to say that, oh, fresh water is priceless because you think you're doing freshwater a service, but it's actually a disservice. I mean, you have to have a price tag. Otherwise, how would you evaluate? I mean, okay, we're running out of fresh water. How much does it cost to bring it back? It's priceless.
Precisely. For me, say that something is priceless means it's no economic value. It has to be part of the equation. And part of the equation means a solid, down-to-earth engineering approach in putting that value in. And I think in that sense, we're not claiming that everything hinges on river networks, of course. Many systems are not controlled or constrained by those, etc. But much of biodiversity, in fact, lives in the river network. And then we can start on there. Will large-scale water management plans of the future, hinging on river networks, be able to include in the equation the reduction of the loss of biodiversity? That's something very important. Can we see how disease propagates by looking at the map of a river? We can. And that's why, so kindly, I think I was awarded the prize, for which I'm very, very proud, humbled, but proud.
What was the first thing that came to your mind when you got the call?
Katarina called, and it was interesting because that connects to the train. I was actually in the train ride from the Swiss border to the Italian one, and for a sizable amount of time, the connection is on and off. So I see a strange number on the phone. I answer, so the words it can't be, etc. So yes, this is Katarina from the
Katarina
Water Institute,
yes.
Professor Rinaldo, and then the connection goes.
You thought it was a prank? You thought it was a prank call?
For about, what is it? About an hour until I reached close to Milan.
Was it that long?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes. And then she called back.
You were sitting there sort of all nervous and what's happening?
Katarina said, Professor Rinaldo, I'm sorry we lost connection, etc. And you have been nominated for the Stockholm Water Prize. I said, oh, fantastic, etc. Yeah. Will you accept the prize? Just falling down.
It was a good thing that you weren't driving a car at the moment.
No, that's the trains are that's civilized.
Right. Always travel by train, then you won't get shocked. Now, this man is, I don't know if you know that, he used to be very involved, he is still involved, or he used to be a high-level rugby player. And yes, impressive, isn't it? And Diane, you have said that this experience actually helps in his work today.
When I made my work of proponent, I, of course, went on internet. It was absolutely not in the file we received, but I did that. And I discovered that he was a high-level rugby player in the 70s. So I was really impressed. Of course, we are judging science, but I'm personally convinced that that experience has really influenced Rinaldo, Andrea, in the way you work. Because when you play rugby, and I discussed with him afterwards, when you play rugby, and I have a son who did play rugby, there is really a team spirit. You work together. There is, at the end, someone who put the ball, but I mean, it's because all have done that. And I think it was probably a very good experience. And he has been using that skill to make people work together. He spoke about the 2002 Stockholm Prize, which has been always working with you and us until the last time. Yeah. And I think it shows what it is important to. Science need people who are able to share, to work together, and to try to transform the information and make a transformation in order to get the point.
This was part of the talk the other day, the CV Corner here, that people from different parts of the water world need to get together, work together for the greater good. Do you agree on the analysis concerning rugby and your work?
It touches my heart. What I'm saying is that John O'Driscoll, probably, hopefully, the next World Rugby President, says something. But once you put your shirt of your country, you can do worse afterwards. You can only do worse. Because, I mean, representing your country means a lot. And rugby, as so appropriately Diane said, it's all about teamwork, it's about collaboration, it's about support, of course. But it's a taxing sport. It's not a sport for the cunning. The best wins in rugby. So the issue is that the result is the logical consequence of the effort you have put in there, how prepared you are. And so is science. And so, yes, and perhaps I had the misfortune/fortune that I became a scientist as a plan B, because I broke my ligaments early on. I was 24.
So
and I had to give up an international career, because at that time you couldn't fix them. So a blessing or a misfortune, I don't know, but certainly it was a plan B.
Blessing for water, at least.
Yes.
I don't know. But
yes. Diane, thank you very much. We're going to see each other tonight because you're going to introduce the professor when it's time to receive the prize.
Congratulations, really, again.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Now, Andrea, I said we were going to come back to Venice. In 1966, there was a disastrous flood. You were living there with your family. How did that affect? Always the gentleman. Åsa Lindhagen, welcome. We'll get back to you in a minute. Now, Andrea, the flood of 1966, how did that affect your family? You need to adjust your mic a little.
Oh, sorry. Just to stand up.
Yep. There
Can you, is it okay?
Just turn it up a little bit. Nope. Now it's...
I'm clumsy, as you imagine.
No,
okay?
I think we need some professional help.
Oh, sorry, sir.
Åsa Lindhagen, Vice Mayor of Stockholm. We're going to talk about the water situation in Stockholm. And Andrea hasn't been forewarned about this, but he will probably join in anyway. You are, as I said, Vice Mayor, and environment and climate are the issues that you work with. How is the fresh water of Stockholm today? What are the biggest problems, challenges?
Well, if we look at water bodies in our city, they have improved if we compare to the mid of the 20th century a lot. But still, the water bodies are not feeling well. And I mean, that is often the case in many metropolitan areas, and so is also the case in Stockholm. We have problems. I mean, the main issues for our water bodies is the eutrophication, and it's also environmental toxins. And of course, there is, I mean, one big challenge in cities is that we have many hard surfaces. So the water has nowhere to go. I mean, it doesn't get soaked into the soil, for example. It follows the hard surfaces and flows down into our water bodies and affects the water quality. So that's one challenge that we have in the cities. And also that we as humans don't take care about nature enough. We have a history of heavy industries in Stockholm that has affected our water bodies, but also now we pour plastics and pollutants, different kind of pollutants into the water. So we're not taking care of this very, not priceless resource, but actually a resource with a high price.
But it makes you wonder how and why did it get to go so far and get so bad?
Well, I do think when it comes to all environmental issues and when it comes to the climate emergency that we now have on our planet, that it's a symptom of when it comes to water, it's just a symptom of how we treat nature in general, human beings, and how we treat our planet. And of course, I also think that politicians have a very big responsibility to change this. And it's just obvious if we look around the situation on the planet today that we are not taking that responsibility in the way we should. And that also applies to water. But of course, we can change this. I mean, it's not a law of nature. We can, of course, take responsibility. And during recent years in Stockholm, we have put much more financial resources into the work of cleaning our water bodies, and also, of course, which is very important, I mean, both cleaning waters, but also stop the flows of toxins and pollutants into the waters.
Mm-hmm. Now, Andrea, you haven't been, as I said, forewarned, so you haven't had an opportunity to look specifically at Stockholm. But what would you say are, I mean, a city about the size of Stockholm, or Stockholm itself, with fresh water on one side and then the brackish seawater on the other? What would you see as the challenges to keep the water there?
Of course, I'm very expert here on the Baltic in particular, but I see that the Baltic and the Mediterranean are cradles of civilization. And we should lead the world and take responsibility, as you said. Time is ripe to take full responsibility of our actions and those ecosystem services we took for granted for so long. It should be clear that they have a price to be paid by the community, and realizing how important to do to look at sustainability in a modern sense, in a concrete one. Yeah. So I completely agree with you, completely.
I'm tempted to say that, isn't it sexy enough for politicians to deal with stuff that is underground? Like, for instance, you know, the pipes and the distribution of water. You want to put the money, you know, where people can see it. That, oh, look, see what I've done. If it's down there and costs, you know, millions and millions and millions.
I'm not going to argue with you on that one, actually. I think you do have a point. But I also think you have to enter into politics because you have a passion about something, and it doesn't matter. We need to take responsibility because we need to take care of nature, not only be focusing on getting more votes. I mean, you have to have a passion for changing things and improving things. And I think also that, especially in Sweden, we have taken water for granted. So of course that also means, why should we put money into it? We have lots of water, it's water everywhere. But I'm not at all convinced that that will be the case in the future. And we also see that when it comes to climate change, we were just talking about that before we started here, that we more and more will see that water will be, I mean, in the center of the climate emergency also, that we will have a lack of water everywhere in the world, and also we will be affected in Sweden.
That is one of the one of the big issues. We're going to talk about that later as well. That water issues have a problem to reaching to getting the attention they need, because climate is, you know, overshadowing everything else. Yes.
I wanted to comment on that. And yesterday we had a seminar at the Royal Swedish Academy of Agriculture and Forestry, and one thing was said, which I think it's probably the only upside of a climatic change that we are facing. It is disasters, the inter-arrival of disasters. Now it's becoming shorter than the intervals between elections. So probably we'll have politicians paying attention, actually, more and more.
That's good. That's good. As I said, the distribution of water, the pipes, and this is not just a problem for Stockholm. I read somewhere that it's a problem for the entire country of Sweden, that we need to, you know, put several millions into the ground because the pipes are leaking, and you know, do we need a disaster, I mean a catastrophe, for something really serious to be done about this?
Yeah, sometimes I actually wonder if that is enough. I mean, we have seen this summer and disasters all over the world, and people are dying already because of climate change, and it's tragedies all over the world. So apparently we do need that, but I'm sad to say that I do believe that we really need to wake up now when it comes to the situation on the planet, because we don't want it to be too late when politicians take full responsibility. We have a lack of time. And also when we talk about water in Stockholm, we do have an old wastewater network system, so we need to make huge investments to be able to take care of the water better and increase the capacity. Right now, when it's raining, heavy rains in Stockholm means that we have a risk of wastewater entering into our water bodies. And with climate change, it will rain much more. So we need to really do these investments, because that's also threatening the quality of the water.
I believe you, Andrea, you have said that the climate change is expected to intensify hydrologic extremes. And it's not, you know, about droughts and extreme rain. I mean, they go together, which may seem strange. I mean, it's dry and then you get all the rain, and the rain doesn't go into the groundwater because the ground is too dry, or you know.
What is really impressive is the acceleration that we see in the consequences, is the rapidity of the change. And if you look at indicators of whether social, whether economic, whether you're talking about the concentration of greenhouse gases, you're talking about the population, you're talking about the fish exploitation, the fish nursery areas exploitation, etc. All of them have a behavior which is called the hockey stick diagram, which in Sweden should be one of the national sports. In fact, is hockey. But it's something from, since we started to measure somewhat regularly, early 18th century, 1710, for instance, the longest time series of daily precipitation started in 1710 in the observatory of Galileo, in fact, in Padua. But what you see is that a Holocene-like flat thing for about 200 and some years, and in 1950 they start going up like a hockey stick. It's the pace of change that is scary.
Yes. And
that before this hasn't sunk into the collective consciousness. And this, what the scientists and what politicians should bear in mind very clearly. So it's the pace of change that worries.
That is very scary indeed. You have also said that it seems like development thinking and environment thinking are stacked against each other. It's like buildings versus ecosystems.
Well, that is a quote from Partha Dasgupta, major environmental economist, professor in Cambridge, and he said, yes, development economics, which is a paradigm in how we work, etc., is stacked against nature. Environmental economics instead is something which you consider, as we were commenting before, the wealth of nations has to include the natural capital. And the downside was that we couldn't put a price tag in the past. Now we know how to. It's clear that economic indicator, flat economic indicator of richness, do not give the sense of the wealth and the poverty of nations. Because what happens is that left alone without, and that's ideological, I have to say, unless the intervention of the states, of entities, sovereign entities, if you leave the system alone, you will find that the distribution of wealth anywhere is self-organized into a curve in which 80% of the wealth is in the hands of the 20% of the richest persons. Well, it's almost inevitable. Those curves are called Zipf's law of wealth. It's in the US, in Bangladesh, wherever you are, with different total amount, but with the same behavior. It's a self-organized behavior. We shouldn't let the system go like that. We have to control it. I am very much fond of state control on those measures, in fact.
Andrea, please sit. You can shake hands while you're sitting down so you don't mess your microphone.
No,
sit,
but I cannot avoid to stand to leave.
What can you do? He's Italian. Yeah. Thank you, Åsa.
Oh, thank you so much. An honor.
I have to stand.
Of course.
Sorry for the microphone.
Now, what I was trying to talk about earlier, Venice and 1966, the flooding. How did that affect your family?
Well, it affected me personally, and I come from a family of water engineers. My grandfather was, yeah, my friend, I should kiss him.
They're good friends.
Very dear friend of mine, and a distinguished colleague. Sorry,
distracted. Yes, constant distractions. Now, let's go to Venice, 1966.
So, I come from a whole family of hydraulic engineers, so it was kind of a daily discussion. But in Venice, everybody teaches hydraulics, because the sense of participation to the fate in such a fragile environment, in fact, since centuries, the citizen, the layperson, has been participating to the debate. Whether or not the Serenissima Repubblica paid any attention is debatable. I've been insulted by a few historians because I have a feeling that they couldn't care less, essentially. They looked like they wanted to show attention. And the culture of the time was not... But what happened in 1966 is that the water raised. It was a major flood. You heard about Florence, for instance, the disaster done to the cultural heritage in there. Masterpieces have been destroyed, and it took like 20 years to kind of recover out of it. In Venice, what happened? Nobody died, but the water went almost 2 meters above mean sea level. It is 100% of the city was flooded. But what was most important is that the storm surge that generated it stayed up for 15 hours above 1.5 meters when 100% of the city is flooded, in about 20 hours. So you used to be thinking of those cycles of ups and downs, of let the moon sweep the lagoon, a famous oceanographer said. Well, it went up and it didn't go down. It went beyond the level in which even the elementary plumbing, the plugs, the electric plugs, where all started, all the deposits of oil, of whatever fuel you had in town. So when finally the waters receded, the misery left behind was really touching, and the sense that probably we wouldn't know whether Venice will survive. And it happened in the past that quite a few capitals have been abandoned, in fact, in historic times. Was that the case? Will Venice survive in the future? That's something which I very much like to call your attention, but that's a different story.
Someone even told you when you brought this up, said that, well, I sympathize, but nobody cares if Venice disappears, which is...
It happened to me.
Yeah.
It happened to me at a conference, and a distinguished professor, when I was saying that, will Venice survive? What if Venice dies? And the guy said, who cares? Well, I hope you do care. Because Venice it's a symbol of our responsibilities, actually, one of the most important symbols of our responsibility, and a template on how, in fact, you have to act opposing climate change whenever the built environment cannot be relocated. But it's a different story. Venice is always in my mind.
Of course. Yeah. Professor of Hydrology and Hydrogeology at the Stockholm University. So happy you could join us despite being slightly incapacitated. This was due to heavy rain making the floor wet and you slipped.
Yeah, water again.
So glad you could join us. But you two, you go way back. How did it start?
Well, the thing that comes to mind, well, we go really way back, since I was a PhD student, and of course the thing I remember most is, again, Venice, and the summer school in environmental dynamics that you have created and kept going for years and years. So that was so inspiring for me to be in that summer school, first as a student,
then as a teacher,
then coming back as assistant, still a student, and eventually as a lecturer. Fantastic. And then we have met on various other science occasions, of course.
Yes. And you also wrote a support letter for Andrea's nomination. So tell us now, and just, you know, let the praise just come. Why is he especially worthy as the laureate this year?
Well, we've heard a lot of things already, but Andrea is a world leader in water science. And what is the most impressive and part, he is not like, the tendency is to look at some process, some component, and focus on that and make great contributions. But Andrea has gone through various aspects of water and water science and linked them, and done so from how the water shapes the landscape, how it carries with it pollutants, sediments, pathogens, and then how that links to biodiversity, to our health, human health, and animal health. So linking all these different facets of water and water science, and doing it with a rigorous scientific framework and approach, that is fantastic, and that is exactly what we need.
Mm. You both have studied the spreading of diseases through water. So tell us about that. You were telling us a little bit earlier, but...
Yeah.
Yeah, as I mentioned, the origin is serendipity. But we saw that one of the great features that I'm very grateful of to my EPFL, the Swiss university, is that I could do field work, I could do laboratory work, I put up a wet lab, and do the mathematical description, which is where we started out. We were born in fluid mechanics, which is a rational way of describing mathematically how nature works. Mm. And an important colleague said that unless the language of nature is mathematics, actually. Mm-hmm. So the federating thing that we have, unless we frame it mathematically, we don't feel it's completely understood. So, and we soon realized that the same mathematical tools that apply to other things, neutral theory, biodiversity, great tradition of science of all kinds, would apply to disease. And then we started collecting data, and that got into something completely different, because, for instance, where do disease go? Mm. Where people go. And that it was known since Middle Ages, and because, isolating cities to prevent against contagia had been ongoing since 1,000 years or whatever. Again, what is different now is the pace, because look at the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. In the past, the Black Plague took 20 years to propagate on a global scale. Now it took one flight from Wuhan to Toronto to spread it worldwide.
It goes so much faster.
So much faster. It's the pace of events, even in the way you see it, etc. So you're starting watching and realizing that nowadays, and that's a story which I think it's very interesting. You can track people's mobility with unprecedented accuracy through the GPS you have in your cell phone, for good or for bad. Now, upsides and downsides. On one side, for instance, the fact that you can track mobility of a grand scale is a big data problem, but you can handle it very nice. You see where people goes. And if you impede, in fact, in the early COVID-19 outbreak, there was a complete lockdown in Italy. And from the phones, you knew that people wouldn't stay at home. My country is adorable, but not very ruly when it comes to obeying conditions, etc. On the other hand, if you go to the south of the world, and you see that the ownership of a cell phone is not socially biased, but having safe water at home, it is socially biased. It's something we really cannot turn our head on the other side. So let's talk about this new normal. Let's talk about modernity. And let's take what is good about modernity, but let's reject firmly what is not good about modernity, in fact.
Gia, what about your perspective on the spreading of diseases?
Well, I have looked at it at some other diseases than you have, and in particular those that are prevalent in the Nordic and Arctic region. And this is a region, you talked about the pace of change, this is a region where the pace of change is faster than in other parts of the world. And of course, going from water to health is a quite straightforward connection. Everyone, I think, can understand that. And we wanted to look at how this the changes in climate and water conditions would affect a range of different diseases that we see here in the north and the Arctic. I went about it in a bit different way. You looked at the actual spreading of the pathogens. The way we have looked at it is how various types of changes, not just the spreading, but how conditions are for mosquitoes, for ticks, for affect different diseases like TB, tularemia, cryptosporidiosis, etc. So we have both gone the pathway of connecting water to health and disease spreading, but there are so many ways you can look at that. But key, I think, in both, what we both do is this new access to data. Huge data. That was also the reason we see a lot of environmental, climate, water data being now openly accessible around the world, which means we can interrogate it in new ways and learn so much more than we could so far. And we can start to see the connections and put together the puzzles. So this data availability, but also our ways of handling the data have improved a lot with artificial intelligence and new modeling approaches and better computer capabilities. So these have been important pushes for us to be able to do this work.
Yeah. Now, Gia is a superb scientist.
I know, that's why she's here, together with you.
But one thing that I'd like to mention is that what she said and what she champions is very important. No one can consider himself safe in terms of climate change, not even Sweden with its abundance of rain, etc. Figure, for instance, and let's forget for a minute our anthropocentric view. We're talking about human disease. A couple of degrees more of air temperature, which means that, for instance, proliferative kidney disease will have disappearing salmonids from the Alps. It's an iconic species. It's very important. And this could migrate north. So no one is safe. That's her message, which I subscribe completely to.
We touched upon this in the talk with Åsa Lindhagen, and you said when you received the prize, or you haven't received the prize yet, but when you found out that you were the laureate, that maybe this will give me the ears of the decision makers. I personally find it very worrying that there are so many world leaders who just don't give a hoot about what we're talking about right now. How do we change that? A small question.
Well, we are fortunate in Sweden. We have a royal family with so much attached to those issues. That's a good example.
That's a good thing. That's a very good thing. Yes, but there are politicians, you know. And they don't, as we already talked about, that they tend to look at things at a very short-term perspective. And this is a marathon.
Yeah.
It's not a...
But it's not just a marathon. We're talking about water, and especially water on land. That's where we live. That's where we have to live through all the effects and the changes. This is a very, very messy problem. So water comes into every aspect of our lives. We are 60–70% water ourselves, each one of us, and all the life is water, but also our societies. So water touches upon everything. And because it does that, the tendency has been, and because it looks so different, its manifestations look so different on land. You have rivers, you have groundwater, soil water, water in the plants, you have all kinds of manifestations of water, and we tend to look at them separately.
Right.
Fragment everything. So we have like tens of different, hundreds of different institutions working with different aspects of water. And of course the danger here, but it's the same water. It's the same water that is lacking when you have droughts that comes back in huge amounts, when you have floods that carry the species and carry the pathogens and pollutants. So but if we fragment it like this, and because it's a messy problem, we make different assumptions. And if the assumptions that are made in the different problems and by different institutions are different, of course, somewhere it's wrong. It's wrong. So if we don't start connect the things, we're working with wrong premises for a lot of different problems. So consistency. So linking things together, that's what I, admire so much in your research, and that's what I think we need to do. We need to do it because we need to find consistency, not because it's pretty and scientifically interesting, because if we don't, we do the wrong things. We understand the problem erroneously. Right. And what we need to do to solve any problem is to understand, to plan, get prepared, and of course look at innovations throughout this whole process. And to do this, we have to take things seriously.
We have to do the right thing. That is the one thing we need to take with us.
Doing the right thing is a messy problem, so we can't blame the politicians. We do it ourselves too, this fragmentation.
Well, I think we should actually convince politicians that the best way forward is to make mistakes like everyone else on the side of science. Science is the issue because it regenerates, it continuously controls itself. There's a self-control mechanism embedded. Science is the answer, to the best of our knowledge. We're not perfect, of course, we're fallible, but that's the way forward.
It's essential.
And Sweden is an example in that respect.
I agree with you, Andrea. GIA is terrific. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations.
Now, Andrea, do you know...
I'm slowly getting back.
Do you know who said, don't listen to me, listen to science?
No.
Greta Thunberg.
Oh, Thunberg.
Yes. And here's another youngster.
Okay.
Jonathan Persson.
Nice to meet you, sir. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Always listen to young.
Yes.
Always listen to.
You've had how many scholars under your wings? Can you even count them?
What do you mean, scholars? Colleagues?
No, the people you've taught and who've become scientists, researchers themselves.
Quite a few.
Yes, quite a few.
I'm very proud of it. My academic family, which is here today in large part, etc. It's the most important thing because it talks about a journey. It's big or small, our discovery. It talks about a journey which you embark without knowing what would have happened. In fact, I was mentioning something yesterday to the junior guys to foster and to kind of propel their enthusiasm, etc. The fact is what a wonderful journey it is if you're accompanied by institutions and colleagues and friends, like it happened to me. I'm very grateful. That's what my most coveted award, in fact.
Yeah. Jonathan Persson, you are the CEO of Helios Innovations, and you were the Stockholm Junior Water Prize finalist in 2019.
Yeah,
Yes.
It's a great pleasure to be here again and see some familiar faces.
Yes, and some of the youngsters over there.
Yeah.
The finalists of this year. Now, going back to 4 years, that was right before the pandemic, 2019.
Yeah, I was the last finalist before the pandemic.
Right.
In Sweden.
How about if you go back and if you think about where you are now, what were the immediate benefits or consequences or opportunities that came by being part of the competition?
Well, a lot of things have happened since then. When I was a finalist, what I was a finalist for was that I developed a new desalination method that could utilize low temperature waste heat to treat salt water. And that's what I presented at this competition. And now we changed a bit, but I will come back to that. But to be a finalist in this really wonderful award, it was both an inspiration to find new friends among other countries and learn new insights. But I especially remember being a finalist. It's quite a intense period where you have the conference during the day and you have fun during night. But I also had an application to the Vinnova, Swedish Innovation Agency, it was an award of 300,000 Swedish crowns. And the deadline was the same night as the banquet. So the night before the banquet, I stayed up during the hotel and worked to, I think, 3 in the morning and finished the application. And I sent it in. And a few months afterwards, I was awarded the grant. And that gave me the opportunity to really start a company and scale up from an idea to something industrial. So it was an intense a few days, a few years ago.
Those are the things you can do when you're young, isn't it? I mean, you stay up all night and then, send in whatever and then go to a banquet.
Yeah. I could do that many moments ago.
Did you even know that there was a Stockholm Junior Water Prize?
Of course I did, I did. And I know about his achievements, actually, which are quite remarkable.
Yeah.
Yesterday I was commenting on the ceremony, but we're looking forward to see some of the past winners of Junior Water Prize winning the Stockholm Water Prize. We probably, because of age, given it started in 1991, we have to wait for a while, but we can wait.
It could happen. That would
happen.
That would be very nice.
I'm very sure.
So, Jonathan, tell us a little bit more about your project, the desalination of seawater.
Yeah. So I come from the city of Halmstad in south of Sweden, where all my young years. There was always watering bans and water shortage. So I was thinking, how could we solve this problem? And the easiest way is to treat saltwater because there are endless amount of oceans. So I developed a new technology that could do exactly this. We used waste heat to evaporate seawater, and we collected a clean drinking water. And after high school, I scaled it up to an industrial test pilot. We treated around 50,000 liters of water per day, and we see that the technology could work. But unfortunately, as said earlier today, water might be priceless, but people don't pay for it. We tried to sell it, both in Sweden and Denmark, but we couldn't succeed. So luckily, in perhaps an act of desperation, we pivoted. So instead of focus on cleaning water to drinking water, we focused on the most heavy polluted water that we could find. So from treating seawater, we then switched to treating liquid hazardous waste. So basically, highly concentrated, really contaminated wastewater, polluted by heavy metals, oil residue, PFAS, and many other chemicals. So the price point for drinking water was 4 crowns per cubic meter. Now we use the same technology to treat liquid hazardous waste from heavy industries. And the most expensive waste we treat, the cost is 4,000 crowns per cubic meter. So it's a huge difference where we now, in the last year, have seen interest from the market and brought up several commercial units operating down in south of Sweden. So now we are treating water in an industrial scale, and that's been a fantastic journey.
Well, I was just getting to that. How has the response been since you started the company?
Yeah, so the first few years, it was a bit tough, as always. And now we have been in a quite intensive development process where we built our first, what we thought would be the first commercial unit last autumn. We tried it, saw that the waste was a little bit too tough for our first design. So we built a new one, but this summer we started our first commercial units, and we currently have several orders, and we only see more coming in. So it's been, and it's also about regulation, because 50% of all the customers we are working with previously let out their wastewater directly into the water bodies, because there have been regulation on heavy metals and PFA, or heavy metals and oil residue, but things like chlorides, nutrients, they have just been let out in the water bodies, even inland. So now around 50% of the customers have water that needs to be treated, but no technology to treat it or nowhere else to put it. So we only see an increase of demand in the future.
How does all this sound to you, Andrea?
Well, I'm totally impressed about what they have achieved. I have to say that, let's focus about the desalination idea you had in the beginning. Clearly, if you look forward, the issue of water scarcity has been tackled in particular in Israel, whose water management is absolutely top class. It hinges on 3 pillars, and all of them could be a lesson worldwide. The first one is a desperate attention to losses and to proper consumption. That kind of frugality and the idea of saving water, which is probably not the most important factor, but certainly psychologically it's very important. The second thing, desalination are relatively small quantities of water because it's energy intensive, it costs, of course, etc. It's only for urban drinking water supply. And the most important thing is 80%, 89% in Israel, recycling of treated wastewater injected into aquifers and then used for agriculture, the largest user. With that, in a climate that ranges from arid to semi-arid, they export potable water to Jordan. So it's, your idea was a very good one in the general direction. I'm impressed by entrepreneurship and that you put in there, so very best of luck to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jonathan, for joining us.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We speak later.
Now, the very first talk I had with you, Andrea, shall we wait until you've greeted our next guests? Stuart Orr and Philip Beetlestone, welcome.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
One of the very first talks I had with you back in March when we were doing the announcement of you being the laureate, you described yourself with one word. You said militant.
Militant, yes. Yes, I am. And I think that learned institutions should be vocal about what's wrong with the authority that comes from the science side that we discussed. Yes, I am militant. I am militant. I'm militant on Venetian issues, on how to save my birthplace, and how about the built and the natural environment should go on, etc. Yes, I am. I confess.
Good. So, welcome, Stuart Orr, freshwater leader at World Wildlife Foundation, Lausanne, Switzerland, and Philip Beetlestone, representing the Stockholm International Water Institute, civil engineer specialized in groundwater.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, welcome. Now, Stuart, I read a blog post of yours from December last year, where it was your call to war, if I may call it that.
Militant.
Wake up to rivers!
Yes.
Exclamation point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and first of all, thank you for being here, allow me to be here. I think that the science and the work that you've done has been inspirational to my institution and my scientists. Certainly the focus on rivers is the heart of our freshwater work around the world. We work in over 80 countries on freshwater issues. So we see these river issues at the core of our work, of course, for biodiversity conservation and human development, etc. But of course, you've talked about the climate crisis being in the news almost on a daily basis these days. We're seeing it. It's raising attention, probably for the wrong reasons. Yet it's bringing attention to the fact that we are shining a bright light on the systems that we have modified and dredged and diverted and not paid attention to, not valued. And I think the call that we make is very in line with the science of Dr. Rinaldo, which is the natural processes, the importance of these processes, the natural capital, the undervaluation of these systems and what they mean, not just for biodiversity, but to society, economy, for the future, for the adaptation to climate change and resilience of the future.
Right. As you wrote in your post, valuing rivers in the era of climate and nature crisis. I mean, very important. And you have said, and this just brought to my mind that, you know, as long as there have been people on this earth, we've tried to control the water, control the rivers, try to lead them in some other direction where they want to go. But as you said, Andrea, I mean, nature tends to produce the same forms. Every river will always do the same thing because that is what rivers do.
It is, yes. And may I just, on this occasion, just talking about the importance of rivers, the importance of a former Stockholm Water Prize Laureate, Sandra Postel,
yes,
whose work I admire. I haven't met her, but I admire her work very, very much in Pillars of Sand and Lentitude, etc. The other message that comes from that, which relates to that, you see how fast nature regains its proper. I can tell you, I normally show those militant talks I'm giving. I'm showing you a picture taken during the lockdown. In the Istituto Veneto of Science, Letters and Arts, the 200 years old institution, has a palace over Grand Canal. And there was a picture which is upside down because it was so flat, the Grand Canal, just because of a lockdown, no boat, no nothing at all. But you could actually invert the thing and you wouldn't even notice. Then I was the administrator, I had to show up. I opened one of those things. In one of those canals, I saw an octopus.
Wow.
An octopus is infinitely sensitive to the cleanness of water. It's only in 1.5 months nature would take back what was its place. So the hope for rivers is that
very true.
We can do that very fast.
That's a lesson to us all, because you have, Stuart, you have also touched upon that, why healthy rivers are so important to us to deal with the impacts of climate change.
Absolutely. I mean, I think if I look at our work that we're doing right now in the Mekong system or in the Ganges, a lot of work is being focused now on nutrients and sediment flow. Unfortunately, through our development over the last 40, 50 years, we've choked that sediment upstream and trapped it, and it's not going downstream to the delta. At that time when we really need deltas to be the protector of climate change impacts, they are being drained of their sediments, and that's a real problem for all of us. So you see these things playing out. The health of rivers, the health of biodiversity means healthy people, healthy economies. And to the point that Dr. Rinaldo just made, something that's interesting in Europe right now is the removal of redundant structures in rivers. And I appreciate that we do need to modify river systems for water supply and other needs, of course. But there's a lot of redundant structures in European rivers, 1 meter to 20 meters high. And over the last 3 years, the energy and the interest in removing these has been incredible. And you're right, Dr. Rinaldo, you can immediately watch that first fish swim upriver for the first time, and people love it. And I think that if there's a good story to be telling about what we do as water professionals, is that people are connecting with the rivers, and we can show improvement going forward. And I think that's important. We have to have good stories.
Do you have any specific example of that? Because that sounds very...
No, across Europe we've got many. I think Finland is leading the charge on this. I think Finland has removed over 500 redundant structures over the last 3 years, very aggressively taking these out. And the videos that you can see and the people involved, it's very exciting. Communities are getting involved. People want their rivers back.
Go Finland, my birth country.
Go Finland.
Yes. Philip, I'm just going to give you 3 letters, well, 2 letters and 1 number. S to S. What is that?
Thank you very much for this opportunity. But I think on Dr. Rinaldo's work, for us it's the connectedness. Again, it's starting at the catchment, the upper catchment. Again, we always look on land, and we talk about water on land catchments. But it goes beyond that. I think it plays out in the oceans. Be it whatever we do on the land, be it pollutants, again, sediments, again, it ultimately ends up in the sea, or S to S, the source to sea, and how that plays out. But I think looking at the catchment, we always want a pristine catchment. That would be our ideal. with no boundaries, letting the systems play out. But unfortunately, or fortunately, again, as humans, society, we have cities, we have towns, and also with these, they have demands, be it for demand for water, for industry, for drinking, but also materials for sort of construction. We need trees, we need sediments. So I think on the work, the causalities for cities that we need to survive, that plays out across our basins. And the causalities, this ripple effect, actually undermines, be it the trees, the ability for my studies being groundwater. I think that infiltrations should be able to get that functioning system, because at the end of the day, in river systems, when there is no rain, there's still water in the river. Where does that come from? It's groundwater. So it's that interconnectedness and interrelationships that I think we have to be able to go back into the conversation on politicians, have to get that linkage to politicians. Like, look, any activity we do, it has a ripple effect. And I think, Dr. Rinaldo, you actually mentioned, I think 2 days ago, we each have a personal connection to water. And the reason that we are in this business and got here is that linkage to water. So from a politician's perspective, or individuals here in this room, what is our story with water, and how we relate to it, and how we value water, not financially, but culturally, spiritually, etc. But again, coming back to Venice, and your story of how you got into water was, for me, very touching. Thank you.
That's absolutely true, because I mean, we all have our personal relationship with water. As I said, I was born in Finland, the land of the 1,000 lakes. Yeah. I mean, the water is everywhere. And here we were in Stockholm. Right next door to us is the Sweetwater Lake Mälaren. So water affects all of us, all of our lives. Philip, could you also tell us a little bit about, we're all here courtesy of the Stockholm International Water Institute, where the field work that SEWE does?
So I think for us at SEWE, we definitely focus, I think Karin has said it very well over the last few days, we focus in the area of governance. We have these beautiful catchments, but through our very nature as humans, I think we put up boundaries. We put boundaries of, be it political boundaries, we put up roadways, we put up pipelines, But in doing so, what we create barriers, even fence lines between properties and be it farm types. You see this from aerial photography, just the way a country manages its water. On one side you have a very desolate environment, on the other side it could be very green, but just the way they look at water and the way they use water. So for us at SEWE, it's the way that we govern our water is extremely important to us. It's that relationship to the politics of who gets what water, when, and where. And that's very complex because it comes back to, like, say, in between two countries. There's history, there's politics, different values. And to navigate that, we have to have a dialogue and have to have a cooperation. If we don't cooperate with, I think it was mentioned earlier, with the speed that change is happening, we're in a very difficult position, I think, as society. So for us, in the space of where it's how do we govern it and how do we work together to get what we need? Again, we being also the environment is a very critical player in this because we need that environment to be able to provide the water and to retain the water that we need for the long term.
Now, back to you, Stuart. You have said that we cannot have any more mistreating of rivers because they are the lifeblood of societies, economies, and ecosystems. We have to stop being river blind.
Yeah, I was militant when I wrote that blog, I think. Yeah, I mean, I think that's, I think it's an easy thing to say. It's a difficult thing to do for the governance reasons that Philip has mentioned. I think the role that we're trying to play, though, is centrally remind people the key function of river systems in our economies and our lives. I think the restoration agenda is picking up on water. I think the nature-based solutions agenda is picking up on adaptation. I think the resilience agenda, all of these things lend themselves to us thinking about how we can build back better, how we can restore our ecosystems, how we can reconnect, and then show the natural capital, value, benefits to society and others. That's very much what I see our role to do.
Andrea, one of the important things in the reason why you are the laureate, I think, is your theory of rivers as ecological corridors, and you have already touched upon that, but let's go back there for...
But yes, what's happening now is the way you rethink the certain work of man made on river systems. It's very worthwhile. It's worth taking a look. But I think you have to look beyond. And looking beyond, it means that we have to look at the landscape and the invisible structures that we are facing in the landscape, the tradition of the places, the political and the social organization, whatever you have it. It means that we should look at ecological corridors and at nature, something which we are not foreign to that. In a sense, it's a concept which, in the proper biogeographical sense, was invented by a German geographer. Well, actually, was a Friedrich Ratzel. It's called the Lebensraum. But is essentially what you're looking in is something which the natural landscape comprehends the work of man and the built environment. So we shouldn't look necessarily. The key point we have is that the landscape nature is enriched by the work of man in many a case. The only thing is we have to control it, in a sense, and not necessarily what the work does is the work of the. So that is the next step, in fact. So we build a natural environment coexisting. Of course, our biophilia is planted in the fact, rooted in the fact, for 9/10 of our history, we've been hunter-gatherers. So biophilia and the love of nature, untouched, is very much imprinted in us. So looking forward, I think there's a wide margin in which we can do well. And essentially, I mean, monsters that have been generated by predecessors of ours have to be demolished, like militant. Right?
Indeed.
We are ready to invite our final guest up on stage. Thank you, Stuart Orr. Thank you, Philip Peterstone.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pekka.
And the guest in question is the current chair of the Scientific Program Committee of the World Water Week. He was also the recipient of the Stockholm Water Prize in 1995 as Chief Executive of Water Aid, Mr. John Lane. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Congratulations to you.
Thank you.
And John is sporting a vintage Stockholm Water Festival tie.
I am. There are not many of these left.
No, it's a collector's item for sure. Because for those of you who don't know, the Water Prize began as part of the Stockholm Water Festival. Part of the proceeds went to the prize. The festival didn't live that long, but here we are 33 years later with the prize still going strong. Now, John, you have a perfect perspective as both laureate and with the World Water Week. Tell us about the development of both of these, the Stockholm Water Prize and the World Water Week in Stockholm.
Yeah, thanks very much. I see the Stockholm Water Prize as being immensely important. First of all, if you look externally, the award of a prize comes out once a year. It's being made in Stockholm. It's under the patronage of His Majesty the King. It's recognizing a person or organization that's very special in a particular topic. That whole process gives that topic worldwide attention. So the Stockholm Water Prize is really raising the profile of water externally. If we look internally within the world of water, the peer review process, and we heard about it earlier in this session, it is so important because not only is it, it's a great honor to the recipient, but also that mutual recognition, it reinforces our sense of togetherness as water people. And I find that a really important feature of it. The prize itself, I see it really as one part of a broader system because we also have the Stockholm Junior Water Prize. We have World Water Week itself, which, as you say, has evolved over the years. We have the patronage of the head of state and the royal family. We've had fantastically consistent support from Swedish politicians, both at the national and at the city level for decades. And you put all those together and you find this is a real focal point for the whole world of water. You know, this is a place where water people come to meet year after year, decade after decade. And the benefit of that, it's not a superficial thing about seeing your friends and enjoying being here. It's a profound impact on the way that all of us work. You look at WaterAid. As you say, WaterAid was the laureate in 1995. The organization benefited enormously from winning the prize because the publicity, not only to WaterAid as an organization, but to the subject of drinking water and sanitation for poor people in developing countries. That was very important, but also it was the first time that WaterAid colleagues were able to really get to grips with the much broader range of other water-related issues, which have then been able to shape the work of the organization coming forward. And that applies to every individual and every organization that come here.
But what about, as you said, I mean, a lot of the bright minds of the water world are gathered here. But what about the fact that we still, I mean, all over the world, we seem to keep taking water for granted? What can be done?
No, absolutely. I mean, again, I think the prize has a useful role here because the award of the prize brings the world attention to some particular important topic. Andrea's work is a case in point. We've heard all about it, and it's absolutely vital for the future understanding of water and of all these areas that you've been talking about. I think also internally, the more that we can work together ourselves as water professionals and leaders in the sector, it gives us an extra strength with which we can then offer water to other people to help them to solve their problems. So that, as you say, we're facing a lot of problems in water, but it's not going to work if we hold our hands out and say, look, please, give us money. We're important. Our subject is important. That doesn't work. Instead, the way that we're thinking now, and this is the basis on which we're working now here at World Water Week, is to say, here, we're offering you, global leaders, politicians, leaders of business and society, water and water management as a tool that will help you to achieve your aims.
But do the global leaders understand the importance of this? I'm a bit worried.
Well, of course, we would say they don't understand it enough, but that's probably our fault, isn't it? Yes, definitely. People are really beginning to cotton onto this. I'm seeing now, compared to 3 decades ago, so much more understanding and more knowledge about water-related activities and problems from world leaders. So I'm optimistic that we are communicating better than before and that we should continue to do so with extra vigor in the future.
Another thing that is quite worrying is all over the world the equal access to water, which we would like there to be, but that is not the case. This could be a possible cause of major conflicts. Maybe already is, but it could get worse.
Absolutely. There are 2 schools of thought on this, Pekka. That there are gloomy people, of whom there have been a few over the years, and they've spoken here in Stockholm, who've said, oh, you know, everything's bad. We're fighting with our neighbours about water. Water is a source of conflict. And then there are the more positive-minded people, the militant people, who point out that actually there are many more examples around the world of places where neighbours working together on water have enabled to set aside their other differences. There may be political differences or ethnic differences, and I don't just mean neighbouring countries, but neighbouring communities, neighbouring nationalities. And by working together in water, they have then found that sort of common ability as human beings to be together and to improve all of their lives together.
Now, of course, we hope that there are many more World Water Weeks to come in the future, and Water Genius is getting together and providing the world with solutions. What can you tell us about, I don't know, next year or future World Water Weeks?
I can tell you 3 things about the theme for next year's World Water Week.
Okay.
The first one, and it relates to a point you were making earlier in the discussion about politicians and a point you just asked me, is that we now that World Water Week has evolved from being just a meeting of water people to being a meeting which is about water but for all people, we are selecting themes that will offer water to help other people to address their own problems. And that's the first point. Mm-hmm. The second point is that on our committee we're responding to a strategic decision made by SIWI at the highest leadership level, which is to place World Water Week as a strong component of the follow-up process to the UN Conference on Water in New York in March. And so for next year, and in fact for several years to come, we will be offering World Water Week as a place where people can come to talk about the commitments they made at that conference, and I think most importantly, for them to learn about how to achieve those commitments they've made in a wide range of different topics. That's the second thing. Mm-hmm. You probably want to know the third thing.
Don't keep me waiting.
That's the most important thing. The third and most important thing is that Karin and I will be revealing the topic tomorrow at 4 o'clock, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on this stage in the What's Next plenary.
Oh, okay. We'll all be here then listening to you. Now, Andrea, this is not your first visit at the Stockholm World Water Week. What about the networking potential in a gathering like this?
Well, it's formidable, actually. And the kind of interaction that you can have is relaxed and so many interesting activities. The Junior Water Prize, which is really a marvelous thing, and the peak of the event, it's the most important, in fact, things. About the comment or what you made, just unfortunately, we'll have, in fact, politicians paying more and more attention because of an increased frequency of events that are generated by climate change, of course. So we are helped in that, fueled by the attention of the Water Week will only grow.
If the politicians know what's good for them, they would listen to you constantly, not just during this week.
You'd be tired of talking to them.
But if we, to wrap this up, if we go back to where I started this, I wanted this 1.5 hours to be about how your work and the World Water Week and everything that happens, how it affects our daily lives. Could you give some examples of World Water Week and then really bringing something practical to people who take part of what has been done and talked about?
Well, let me give the example of WaterAid, the laureate in 1995. I was just the lucky person who came here to accept the prize on behalf of the organization. But the anecdote that I want to give that illustrates that was that until that moment, WaterAid had been exclusively concentrating on carrying out field projects in water and sanitation. But the money that was part of the prize was allocated by the Board of Trustees specifically to employ the first staff member who was going to be working on advocacy, the first militant, if you like. And from that, directly originating from the prize here in 1995, has grown all of the really powerful and large-scale advocacy and policy work that WaterAid carries out. And that, I am convinced, has helped many more million people around the world to have safe water and sanitation than the actual project work that WaterAid's partners carry out. And all of that is thanks to World Water Week and SIWI.
Very good. Thank you, John. And Andrea, this evening you will receive the actual prize from the hands of His Majesty the King, so I will see you there. And I'm very grateful that we've seen you and you've listened to us for this hour and a half, both here at Stockholm Waterfront and online. And now remember to nominate for the Stockholm Water Prize 2024. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.